new leaked legal advice has presented a new logic, now saying that the target is not the individuals at all, but actually the cocaine, and as such, anyone killed is collateral damage. And that is an entirely new argument being presented by the USA.
Now, the White House is facing scrutiny over the legality of US strikes on suspected Venezuelan drug trafficking boats after it confirmed today that a top Navy admiral gave the order to strike the same boat twice, causing the deaths of 2 survivors. At a cabinet meeting at the White House earlier today, Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, now named the Secretary of War, blamed the second strike on the fog of war and said he did not see the survivors. At the same cabinet meeting, President Trump suggested the US would not stop at attacks at sea.
These people have killed over 200,000 people, actually killed over 200,000 people last year, and those numbers are down. Those numbers are down. They're way down. And they're down because we're doing these strikes, and we're going to start doing those strikes on land, too. You know, the land is much easier. It's much easier. And we know the routes they take. We know everything about them. We know where they live. We know where the bad ones live. And we're going to start that very soon, too.
Well, let's get some more on all of this from Latin American correspondent Jon Bonfiglio. John, a very good evening to you.
Hey, Carol.
Well, I mean, President Trump certainly seems to be ramping up the pressure there. He was talking about potential strikes on land. I mean, is it clear whether the US has the legal authority to carry out these, well, first of all, these attacks on the suspected drug trafficking boats at sea, and furthermore, as President Trump was suggesting there, on land as well?
Yeah, and he also said today that any country manufacturing and transiting drugs to the USA is subject to attack, which of course has generated deep trepidation, ongoing trepidation across Latin America, because that could justify an attack on almost any country in the region. The legality is absolutely the central question. I think that's where the landscape has changed a little bit with this news of this double strike, because it generally, it rests on how they're framed. Now, for the US administration up until now, it's said that it is at war with a non-state actor and that it's defending the country, the homeland, giving the lethal strikes legal cover. Now, legal experts, however, say that there is no evidence of those killed, even if criminals, of which no evidence has been provided, that they are strategically engaged against the USA, and that no law, American or international, provides for the summary execution of civilians, even if criminals. Now, where news of the double strike entirely changes the landscape, is that even if we accept the US premise that it is at war, executing survivors of a strike would amount to a war crime. So even by the US's questionable legal logic, the killings on 2nd of September constitute the opening of a new Pandora's box as regards the killings in the Southern Caribbean. I'd also add one other point which has emerged just today. It seems that the US administration are aware of this because new leaked legal advice has presented a new logic, now saying that the target is not the individuals at all, but actually the cocaine, and as such, anyone killed is collateral damage. And that is an entirely new argument being presented by the USA.
And we've also had reports, haven't we, that President Trump has directly called on President Maduro of Venezuela to step down. I mean, we were talking to a senior military figure last night, was suggesting that actually what President Trump wants is regime change in Venezuela.
So, yeah, my understanding is that they had a call last week in which Donald Trump gave Nicolas Maduro an ultimatum to step aside, which was rejected by Nicolas Maduro. I still maintain that regime change is a secondary interest to Donald Trump. It's a primary interest to a number of his advisors, undoubtedly, the likes of Marco Rubio et al. But for Donald Trump, the visceral instinct is twofold. It is to get rid of China from the hemisphere and to supplant Chinese influence with US influence, and to be able to make the most of US influence, or rather for US influence to be able to make the most of new burgeoning contracts from countries that are ripe for exploitation, of which Venezuela is top of the pile.
We should point out, shouldn't we, that Nicolas Maduro, I think I'm right in saying, and it would be very useful for you to clarify this. I mean, he was perceived as having stolen the last election. He's not seen as a legitimate leader, even in Venezuela itself, where he has presided over a pretty brutal and unpopular regime.
You're absolutely right. Nicolas Maduro is not a legitimate leader. Venezuelans of whatever particular spectrum, the vast majority of them, are desperate for change, are desperate for a new horizon, and not just as of a year or two ago, but going back now over a decade, I would say. And of course, the most egregious example of his autocratic regime was the stolen election last year in Venezuela. I've covered rigged elections a number of times, Carol, over the years. To date, I have not seen one as brazen and amateurish as the one which took place in high summer of Venezuela last year, 2024.
What happened?
I mean, the numbers. So the Venezuelan electoral system is actually pretty modern and up to date, and vote tallies emerge electronically from each station and can be cross-referenced. Now, as soon as voting finished, as soon as voting closed, those disappeared. They did not emerge, and they have not emerged to date. And it's only the ones that have been sourced by the opposition are the ones that we've seen, and they indicate a 3-1 victory for the opposition in Venezuela.
Nonetheless, despite all of that, is it possible to tell how Venezuelans and their neighbours in the region are viewing these very open threats from the Trump administration?
Well, and one of the deep worries is that the conflict zone may spread across the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago, at its closest, only 7 miles from Venezuela, has in the last few days covertly installed a U.S. military radar facility in the country, which would mean that, should Venezuela and the USA come to blows, that they would perceive Trinidad and Tobago as a de facto target. And go back to my initial comment. This is the region, Latin America, is pretty used to interventionism, in particular covert interventionism, but some obvious attempts to sort of to engineer the landscape through history. But what we're seeing at the moment, and the threat of what is to come, is something that has never quite been experienced before, as palpably as it is being seen.
Jon Bonfiglio, Latin America correspondent. Really good to get your insight. Thank you so much for joining us.
I watched that first strike live.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Tuesday that he watched in real time as the first U.S. strike in September hit an alleged drug smuggling boat. But he said he didn't see any survivors in the water or witness the second deadly strike, which he described as happening in the, quote, fog of war. Hegseth defended that follow-up strike, which now faces bipartisan scrutiny in Congress, amid concerns about the legality of the administration's actions.
So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And it was the right call. We have his back.
2 U.S. officials told Reuters that Hegseth had ordered the lethal strikes on drug vessels, including the one in question. However, those officials did not confirm the Defense Secretary's involvement in the decision to carry out the second strike. They say operational control was handed to Admiral Frank Bradley, who leads U.S. Special Operations Command. The White House said on Monday that Bradley had authorization to conduct the second strike. A Washington Post report said the commander overseeing the operation ordered a second strike to take out the 2 survivors in order to comply with the Pentagon chief's direction that everyone be killed. Trump, who told reporters on Sunday that he wouldn't have wanted the second strike, largely voiced support on Tuesday while saying he hadn't known about it.
As far as the attack is concerned, I still haven't gotten a lot of information because I rely on Pete. But to me, it was an attack. It wasn't 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Somebody asked me a question about the second strike. I didn't know about the second strike. I didn't know anything about people. I wasn't involved in it. I knew they took out a boat.